finally here. You've finally arrived. You've at last found the one place which holds the answers to the questions of the ages. You're excited. Your heart palpitates. Is it real? Can it be true? You're understandably hesitant, yet determinedly hopeful. That is good. Your faith in such matters will be rewarded. You'll not find pat and cliched answers here, no! Here's a place of clarity, of definition, of explanation, of truth. Here combines science and religion, removes tradition and replaces it with fact. Here the universe is holographic, yet tangible, ethereal, yet substantive. Here is a place where time is understood as atemporal. Here there is harmony amidst chaos. Here is where the darkened glass is finally cleared. Here is where you'll find the answers to all the unanswered questions which stretch across the cosmos.
And you are across the cosmos for the next hour. I am Chase Rockwell. I am your host. I am joined in studio once again by my co-hosts,
David Cameron,
Mark Wilson,
Lou Rogers.
GMOs, Genetically Modified Organisms. They've been all over the news in the last several years, and the news hasn't always been good. For every positive story reported about how such crops help save lives and stave off starvation of little children in some sub-Saharan African country, there are stories detailing the increase of incidence of autism, Asperger's, ADHD, ADD. In addition, there are stories of various medical maladies such as the increases of gynecomastia, which is breast growth in males, not a good thing, at an early age. Really not a good thing. While not directly related to GMOs in the strictest sense, such conditions have been associated with the injection of hormones into livestock in order to hasten the maturing process so that product can be brought to market earlier than normal, and thus these people make more money. Whether it is widely known or not, hormones do not dissipate in these animals. So when they're injecting all of this stuff into chickens and cows and ovines and what have you, it just passed along to us. So if you're injecting a bunch of chickens with estrogen and testosterone, you're injecting yourself, roundabout sort of a way. All of this stuff is passed on to the consumer. Thus, eating an estrogen-laden meat over a period of time is going to have a cumulative effect on the consumer, and we are seeing that. Another effect of this manipulation has been the issue of precocious puberty in girls, causing them to begin to sexually mature as early as 7 or 8. And this is becoming something more common than not in the last couple of decades. And we're seeing medical personnel wringing their hands over the reasons why, and it seems to me that they are completely ignoring the elephant in the room, rather. Given these startling statistics, one has no choice but to look at changes in the overall environment in order to arrive at a cause. Thorough investigation is becoming more and more difficult as the entire issue of GMOs and the beef and poultry industry have become, and I suppose the pork industry as well, have become highly politicized. In much the same way that we have witnessed concerns over climate become politicized to the point of absurdity, so too is our food supply. Those who make a handsome living producing food are not going to just hand over the documentation. It is far easier to pay off politicians, to look the other way, and then to face the Congressional Investigative Committee that would otherwise follow in a real, true investigation. In short, it isn't going to happen, and one need look no further for the truth of the statement than the monolithic company, which is Monsanto Corporation, or, Lou, what was the name of the other one?
ConAgra.
ConAgra, yes. Monsanto's slogan, in short, is a memorable catchphrase which reads simply, "Growth for a better world." But who is Monsanto, and by extension, who is ConAgra? And why are they the largest producers of GMOs in the world? Moreover, why are we forced to buy everything they're selling if there is concerns that what they're selling is this dangerous? I'm going to focus on Monsanto for a moment. Briefly, Monsanto was founded in St. Louis, Missouri in 1901 by John Francis Queeny. He was a 30-year-old veteran of the pharmaceutical industry. He funded the startup with his own money and capital from a soft drink distributor. and gave the company his wife's maiden name. His father-in-law's last name was Monsanto. He was a wealthy financier of a sugar company in Puerto Rico. The company's first products were commodity food additives like artificial sweetener, saccharin, caffeine, and vanillin. Now, those of you who are old enough might remember the whole saccharin thing that went on back in the 1970s, where it was growing these gigantic tumors on rats and mice and everything else. Thus, we don't really see much of saccharin in the consumer aisle anymore. They got rid of it. But this is where Monsanto's founder made a lot of his initial cash. Monsanto subsequently was the maker of such insecticides as DDT, defoliants as Agent Orange, and by the 1980s, Monsanto scientists were among the first to genetically modify a plant cell, publishing the results in 1983. 5 years after that, Monsanto conducted the first field test of genetically engineered crops. In 1985, Monsanto acquired G.D. Searle and Company, which was a life sciences company focusing on pharmaceuticals, agricultural, and animal health. In 1993, Monsanto's Searle division filed a patent application for Celebrex, and a lot of you people may be familiar with Celebrex, which in 1998 became the first selective COX-2 inhibitor to be approved by the U.S. Food and Drug Administration. Celebrex became a blockbuster drug and was often mentioned as a key reason for Pfizer's acquisition of Monsanto Pharmaceuticals business in 2002. This is not just big business, this is huge business. And again, documentation as to just what is going on is not going to surface anytime soon. Between the top-notch lawyers on staff of Monsanto and ConAgra, and the lobbyists, and even the buying of politicians through various means, and let's not be naive children here. This is what happens. Politicians, all the way back to the time of Boss Tweed in New York, have been bought off. It's more common than one might think. So both of them, Monsanto and ConAgra, are perfectly safe from any real challenges. Now, there's a quote attributed to former Secretary of State Henry Kissinger, who in 1974 stated, "If you can control the food supply, you can control the people." There are some who believe that the thought was not original to Kissinger, but rather he expanded on the thoughts of the Royal Commission of Population formed in the United Kingdom under King George VI in 1944. And he was alluding primarily to the colonies in Indian and African continent. Britain at that time still had many colonies in both areas, and there was a large problem with population and food. There was also a large population with the colonies wanting to get rid of Britain. You had to control them some way. Now, one will find themselves at the mercy of whoever controls the food supply, no matter how wealthy one finds themselves otherwise. You can be the wealthiest person in the world, you got to eat. And if ConAgra and Monsanto control the food supply, that's where you're going. You will bow to them. So, are we slaves to Monsanto? Are we slaves to ConAgra? Are we as a people at the mercy of a company or companies which were begun to the benefit of its founder and the public, but which have now become essentially a cage for all of us? So, discussing this conversation, are we being held hostage by these companies? Are we being dealt with fairly? Where are we going? What are we doing? How are we allowing ourselves to be so horribly dealt with for just trying to survive?
Well, first off, I know there's a lot of people that aren't even aware of what you're talking about.
Thus,
that's why we're
the
here.
need for this show.
They're not aware. They don't know.
Well, I want to jump in real quick with some clarification on ConAgra. Now, ConAgra does not produce GMO foods. They produce ready-eat foods. They own things like Hunt's. They own things like Ready Whip, Bertelli's, Blue Bonnet margarine.
That'll kill you.
They own all these. They own several different major name brands, and their interest in GMO is it keeps their product cheaper to manufacture. And where they come into the fight on GMO is primarily when we have states saying, hey, all we want is to be able to walk into a store and pull up a product and look at it and say it clearly on the package, this product contains product from GMO material.
Okay, and I'm going to get into
and
that.
they fight very hard on that. And I want to clarify that for our listeners right away. ConAgra doesn't produce, but they are in the fight.
All right, and
Because they use.
There's a reason for that, though.
They use.
there is, and
They
I,
use
money.
and I want to get into the whole situation with respect to labeling, GMO food labeling, because it is a big scam.
Yes,
Well,
it
that's
is.
a failure to them, a huge failure for them if it's allowed. If it's legislated, if it's put into law that they have to label GMO food, they've lost the war.
Well, here's the deal, okay? And as long as we're on this topic, let's get to it. State of Oregon had an initiative last election cycle in which they wanted to have GMO labeling on all the foodstuffs coming through Oregon. However,
In the state of Washington the year before.
yeah, in Oregon's case, there were so many exemptions to have made the initiative pointless. All the big companies were exempted from having to label their food. So what you had now were little tiny farmers, little tiny mom and pop producers who were forced, because they couldn't pay off the government, they couldn't pay off these rat bastard politicians, one of which just got his ass handed to him on a platter in the state of Oregon, John Kitzhaber.
Can I?
Let's say at this time the federal court or the federal FBI is looking into him for.
They are under subpoena with all their documents, and I hope the man goes down in flames because he has made a mockery of the entire political process within that state. But this is part and parcel of what's going on.
Yes, it is.
All of these companies getting exemptions from having to do what the small guy who can't afford to pony up the cash has to do.
There's a couple of issues that are very powerful, so that the listeners out there, if you're listening, what is so dangerous about GMOs, and I have to say they are very, very dangerous, is that it's a genetic modification.
Yeah, genetically
It's
modified
not simply
organism.
a chemical applied. That's not what it is. You're genetically engineering the corn or genetically engineering the wheat to be to be fungus resistant, or they also create a type of insecticide called Roundup. Now they create, this is really weird, they create the insecticide, but they also create the genetically modified wheat or corn or whatever, soy. Soy is big. So now the problem with this is that you're then allowed to dump huge amounts of Roundup on top of this wheat or soy or corn. And on top of it, it's also resistant to insects itself, genetically modified.
The wheat you're talking about.
Wheat,
genetically
corn,
modified.
soy, yeah.
Corn is literally designed to kill the insect.
The double whammy, so that the insects die and the weeds are killed around it, but you're allowed to dump a tremendous amount of toxins on it, and they say, hey, it'll survive these toxins. Just because the corn or the soy can survive the toxin put upon it doesn't mean the human can ingest it. No matter
Well,
how
according
much
to
you
the
wash
FDA,
it. No.
we can.
No matter how much you wash it, you're not going to get it out
I'm
of it.
telling you, as a point of
Well, they're wrong.
position, the FDA looks at this stuff. Now, this is after. Oh, and I'm going to piss a lot of people off with this statement, but I don't care. This is after the FDA has given a ton of money under the table from companies like Monsanto, etc.
Oh, very much so.
And they're paid off. And if you don't believe me, you ask yourself why a guy like Harry Reid, who's been a public servant for 45 years, is a multi-millionaire on a salary of $173,000 a year. I don't even want to hear it.
But let's
Or Nancy Pelosi, who is now at $1 billion.
okay. But let's tell the people why it's so dangerous.
I had to tell them how it happened first.
When you genetically modify corn, for instance,
Well, I don't mean to interrupt, Mark, but the GMO side is going to say mankind has been genetically modifying plants for centuries. That is the first thing they're going to say.
But that's
through
incorrect.
pollination. That
was natural. That's natural. And they call it something else.
Well, no. When you take corn or you take soy,
Hybrid or something like that. That's
Right.
natural.
Right.
But
I'm just going to play the devil's advocate here a
Well,
little
right.
bit, so that way.
when you go into the DNA, okay, the structure of the corn or the the wheat or whatever it is, and you alter it and you include certain things that may very well be natural. It may be that you find an insect's resistant to this, so you will put that particular DNA into the corn or the soy, whatever. You come up with a Frankenstein product. That's really what you come up with. Now, it looks bright and yellow, and they're bigger strawberries, bigger ears of corn. They're not chewed on like most corn is when you get it out in the field. There's no little insects that have gnawed on it, so it looks beautiful. You can even enhance the color. You can make it look so rich and luscious, and it tastes good too. You can enhance it so it tastes really good. So you say, what's the downside? The downside is that when you alter the genetics of the corn or the soy, and you ingest it, you have altered your body, regardless of what anyone says. When you ingest something, the way our body works in breaking down foods is we ingest it into our system. It actually goes down into our blood supply. It goes into our brain. And we have all kinds of side effects at this point that they say that we don't, because they're a self-policing business. They only have to police themselves. There's no independent testing except outside the United States, which tests have shown and proven that there's problems with the GMOs.
Well, interesting fact. Within the United States, they'll say they've done over 200 tests proving GMOs don't hurt. And as you said, there's no independent testing.
You need independent testing.
And the foreign countries that have done independent testing, such as Japan, will not allow GMO products.
Well, that says something.
There are several countries.
In Oregon, they had the species of genetically modified wheat show up in the field. And the first thing Japan did was ban all imports from Oregon. Period.
So who got harmed the most because of what is called crop drift or seed drift? Because Monsanto's has got these huge tracts of land. Wind comes up, blows off some of the topsoil. It lands into Farmer Joe's little 1 acre plot.
His stuff's contaminated.
All of his wheat now contaminated. And to make matters worse, Monsanto comes in and sues the hell out of him
for
he's stolen intellectual property. And so Farmer Joe can't survive this embargo on his wheat from Japan. Monsanto just goes, screw it.
Here, the biggest danger of all is it's shown in history that we have a tendency to leap before we do enough testing. That's real typical.
When there's a dollar sign attached to what,
So what we're doing in America, not we, but what these companies are doing is they're genetically modifying food groups that we need as staples in our nation and in the world. They're critical. Corn is critical, soy is critical, wheat is critical. So when you genetically modify that and you get farmers on board by giving them good deals, you can grow more wheat per acre, for instance, and you keep the seed at a level that it's palatable at this point. They're not allowed to have their own wheat and have their own seed.
No.
They're not allowed to. Just like the farmer that would always keep back the best ears of corn and let him sit in his attic or somewhere until the next season and then use the seed, he's not allowed to do that. He has to buy the Monsanto seeds.
What happens
when
is
he's contracted with them.
Yep.
And what happens is you got like a little independent farmer who's got a tract of land. Maybe he's never bought a damn thing from Monsanto. They will still come into his farm on his land, test his crop, and if they find a genetic similarity, they will seize everything because he's in violation. He has stolen their intellectual property.
So that's
and there's a problem with that.
They are friggin' robber barons.
Because I have a big question: how do farmers even get pure, natural,
You would have to go outside the country.
Yeah, that's the point.
Well, it still is being grown in our country, but it's becoming.
I looked on some of those sites with organic farmers, and even they concede there's no way for them to know for certain.
Well, it becomes an issue
because we're into generations now.
No matter how hard you protect this, because financially, what do you charge for a loaf of bread? If you have to pay $2 for a loaf of bread with genetically altered and Everything in the store is genetically altered as far as any kind of bread. Or you have to charge $7 or $8
or 10,
or even 10. Who's going to buy it? You can't. So just simply,
the granola crunchers would buy it.
right. But what happens is over time,
Well, there's a movement.
the average family can't afford to eat right.
Exactly, the average family can't.
And so they're going to ingest, like, you're going to go to the store and you're going to, oh, look at this lovely corn. It's amazing, thick, rich, and gorgeous. And you can get 5 years for, $2 or something like that. And over here is the organic corn.
Which is moth
And it
eaten,
looks a lot worse, and it's twice the cost. And then
it's probably still genetically modified.
and here's the silly thing. All organic vegetables, whether we are aware of this or not, it doesn't say if they use GMOs.
No, they're
it
just
said they don't have any
growing
pesticides.
They're
organically.
grown organically, but you're growing GMOs organically. So what you're saying is that, hey, we've got seeds that have been messed with, but we're growing it healthily. We're not putting on the insecticide. We're putting a certain type of soil down and so forth. But the problem is that they're already resistant to fungus and insecticide.
Yeah, exactly.
And so what are we eating? We always thought that, you eat organic, you're eating good. Spend the extra, 50%, 100% more for organics, then you find out you're eating GMOs anyway.
No, it's a
Well,
scam.
and there's a huge move in our country right now that people are backyard growing, clean, organic, natural.
You can't go to Home Depot,
No.
Lowe's, and
Wait
buy
a second.
and
You
buy
mean my
seeds-
garden was infested
No, you
and
can't.
buy
with
seeds.
GMO
But
foods?
there is,
and buy seeds that
there
are not
small
GMO seeds.
co-ops all over our country. My cousins are involved in this, and
Can they get pure seeds?
Yes, they can, but
You may not want to give out their address on this.
no, no. But
The Gestapo will come
but
after
what
you.
happens is
We want to see the Pippets.
they work because
Well,
they're
I think
small,
there's somewhere in the Monsanto
because
Protection
they're-
Act that prevents
they're
this from
just
happening.
They're one family, and it's costly even to. It's not just costly.
What's
to
the
get
yield
seed.
like on these virgin seeds?
I don't know for sure. I'm not that into what they do, but
Here's-
I know they do it, and I've asked them a few questions about it. But anyway, what I'm trying to get at is that they do these little co-ops in their community and only work with trusted individuals they know as far as trading seeds, and they also harvest their own. Once they get natural stuff from out of the country, they harvest their own. They also allow some to go to seed, whatever it is. Some things go to seed, some grow their seeds, but they do their own seeds too. So
Yeah, this is ridiculous. There's no reason we
Well,
should
no,
be
but
in
that's-
this situation
but that's
with
where-
food that you grow.
that's where many people believe that that's where we're at. There are people.
Oh,
that
I
are
know
aware
that's
of
where
it.
we're at, but it's disgusting. I mean,
It is horrible. And
when
it is-
you are
it is
prevented
political.
from being able to grow your own food on your own land because you've got some huge business that will just rain down the wrath of God on you because they've got an endless supply of attorneys and money to pay for them. They can lose one case after another, but eventually they'll bankrupt whoever brings them to court.
Well, from what I understand, they're not going after the individual families yet.
No, and
No,
they
right-
won't. That
right now
wouldn't
they're
be
hitting
worth
the
their
small
time. But they're
farmers.
hitting the small farmers big
Right.
time. It's either give us your farm,
Right.
here's some money, give us your farm, go away, or we'll just run you into the ground and take it anyway. They're the big bully on the block.
Right. Exactly.
And as we were talking, about the GMO labeling acts, both in Oregon and state of Washington, we had farmers that were coming out saying, "Hey, this is wrong." But when you start looking at what those farmers do, they get money from ConAgra to help pay for the GMO seeds.
I'm aware of
To-
that. My main...
And that's why they're going to fight the labeling. So even when we hear farmers saying, "Hey, GMO foods are fine," there's a reason why they're saying it's fine.
Yeah, but my main argument with Initiative 92 was that there were far
it was
too many...
Poorly written.
It was poorly written, but I don't think that was by mistake. I think it was by design.
I think Monsanto got into the whole process.
Oh yeah.
And
There's
They pumped money.
effectively
into all
there
that.
were so many exemptions given off that it made the initiative pointless. Now, I'm not trying to side with Monsanto
I'm
here.
not either. I think they were involved in the writing of it.
Either you're going to make this uniform across the board, or not at all. And was Monsanto involved with the structure or the writing? You know what? I can't help but believe, although with the level of politicians we have nowadays, it's sometimes I just don't know, that their fingerprints weren't on this, because it's like with Obamacare. Why are you giving out exemptions to certain businesses on Obamacare
and trade unions?
And not either everybody is on board or no one should be on board, because all you've done is favor people who are contributing to your campaign and giving you cash. The last time I looked, that's called a bribe, and you get your ass thrown in prison for it. So why are these people? Not yet. He'll buy himself out of it.
More than likely.
His career is hopefully destroyed, but you never know with the granola crunching progressive liberal crowd. They're always out there with a spade shovel in the cemetery, digging them all up and running them again.
That's true.
Let me share something about it's kind of a funny story. There's a guy that tested in kind of an odd way how the extent of GMOs, where it goes to. Now you're in a pristine environment that everybody wants the government to have certain national parks, right? And that's a good thing. So we can keep green, lush areas that we're hopefully allowed to walk around in and have fun, go on picnics. Now, in remote areas, you go up to Yosemite or you go into some of these other beautiful places and you see the rivers and the fish in them come through hatcheries.
Yes.
They're little baby, tiny fishes when they come out of their mommy's tummy,
the
right?
fry. Well, the eggs.
And guess what they eat?
I know. They eat the GMO grain and feed and everything else.
Because they have to get what's cheap and it's government contract.
We've got fisheries right up the road here that do the same thing.
All the fish are eating GMOs.
Yeah.
So you can't get away from it. I'd like to get into meat. We will in a minute. But another problem is that so you have the fish that are affected in our streams and rivers and lakes. And another thing we have is the weeds. Now, when you create a corn or soy or something that's genetically resistant to certain insects, and then you make it genetically resistant to Roundup, so you can pump you can be very liberal with your Roundup, which is the whole idea behind it. But the problem is the weeds now have got a resistance. We have a lot of super weeds throughout our country that never existed before, and they're genetically altered now forever. On top of that, you have the insects that are becoming altered because they're eating. Some are surviving, most are dying, but the ones that do survive, insects adapt pretty well. And so now they have these, they're genetically altered because in their system it's different. You've got birds that eat the insects. And there's this, it goes on and on and on. So what looked good in the 1970s and the 1980s, save the world from hunger, give everybody more fresh vegetables that look nicer, that have a longer shelf life, that don't look so bruised and rotten. It all was wonderful. But at what cost will the children of our generation pay, and our grandchildren and great-grandchildren? And by that time, there's no way to turn it back.
Well, let's keep in mind right now, the Autism Foundation has stated that within the next 30 years, every 1 out of 2 children will be born with a form of autism.
And why is that, Lou?
Good question. You have to wonder, autism went on the rise at the start of GMOs being introduced into our food system. You have to question whether GMOs are the cause or not. We have to question.
Because of the time frames.
Just because it's too coincidental.
What is autism?
Well, no one knows really for sure.
But what do they think it is?
They believe it's the brain's inability
to
process.
And how's the brain work? It's an electrochemical
reaction.
Okay, so how does it work?
neurons have transmitters, and as the neurons fire back and forth, the synapses fires and tells you what you think.
So as beautiful as the human body is, and incredible as it is, if there's
It's a machine. It's a
if
perfect
you
running
tweak
machine.
it just a little bit.
Okay, let me read you something. We're talking about Roundup. We're
Right.
talking about incidence of autism. How exactly does Roundup work? Okay, the active ingredient in Roundup is
BTH
called
toxin.
I'm going to screw this up, so pardon me. Glyphosate,
Glyphosate.
and I'm probably mispronouncing that. But essentially, what it does is it inhibits an enzyme involved in the synthesis of aromatic amino acids, triosine, tryptophan, and phenylalanine.
So it's an inhibitor.
It is an inhibitor, okay? And I remember back in the olden days when we used to work with organophosphates in the pesticide industry, one particular brand of insecticide was called Dursban, which I believe is off the market now. It was a cholinesterase inhibitor. And what it essentially did was affect the electrochemical connections within the brain. And essentially, we used it for as a termiticide, and the termites would just vibrate to death. You couldn't stop it. Your entire nervous system ceased to function. So there was Dursban toxicity in people, and it had the exact same effect. It is a cholinesterase inhibitor. So when you are putting all of this different types of chemicals into people via the crops that they've been eating, because here's the deal. Roundup was initially brought to market in 1970 by one of Monsanto's chief chemists, who at the same time was also working to make glyphosate resistant crops. So you've got crops that are grown that are not susceptible to this particular type of herbicide, and then you've got the herbicide itself. So what is it now that these particular crops have within them that is being passed on to us that is no longer within the norms, if you will?
Here is where it gets really strange. It's kind of wonderful, too, because unless you have independent studies, just like they're looking for cancer, the cause of cancer, what causes, like the common cold, they found there's several hundred different types of strains. But anyway,
probably more than that.
I'm sure there is, but you don't know until you test it year after year after year after year. And as we increase our ability to understand and our technologies increase, we're going to miss things. So it looks okay. They might say, hey, it's fine. You can eat it, you're okay. Look how lush and beautiful it is. And it's filling the bellies of people, and they're fine. But have you ever noticed this? And this is not an offensive thing to anybody, but I'm old enough to remember when everybody was fairly thin. Now we're told today that we're a fast food society, and that's why we're heavy. And okay, but yet not everybody goes through fast food restaurants. Not everybody eats that way. I'm a big guy, and I bodybuild. I don't need to take any protein at all because I'm huge, and I don't take protein. I eat a lot of salads and stuff like that, and I'm still huge. But one of the problems is I can see genetically that it's what I'm eating or have been eating for years that has made me this way. What is it? Is it the meat? I eat very little. I don't eat that much meat. I eat a lot of tuna fish and fish, different types of fish, chicken, and so forth.
Well, that's meat.
Well, meat in the sense
red
of beef.
meat.
Yeah. Hamburgers, I eat like once a month. I eat a hamburger. So it's not like I'm eating all this, crap. But still, I'm a big guy, and I don't need to take protein at all to contend with other guys out there. And so I know there's something in our food, and people have been saying there's something in the food. We can't pinpoint it. But America has gotten huge, and now other countries are getting huge too.
Well, I remember even as a teenager, there was talk about the hormones in the beef. So I'm assuming, since I heard it, that they've been doing this for a long time.
Oh, yeah.
And
hormones, steroids,
and hormones, and The steroids, I mean, all of it will affect us.
And penicillin, they jack them with the
Penicillin.
cheapest type of amoxicillin or penicillin they can.
Right.
Yeah, and when we say jack, we mean
Jack. They put X amount of dollars into each beef critter. That's called steer.
They almost overdose the thing.
So what we're, for instance, if you go into beef, that's a whole different world out there. We get a lot of our beef from Canada, and the way they grow the beef is totally different than most people would think. And most of the steer eat their own dead, ground up steers. So they're cannibals. And
not willingly.
No, they don't know. They're just
The only time I've ever seen willing cannibals in the animal kingdom is when we used to feed my friends' chickens Kentucky Fried Chicken.
Oh,
They loved Kentucky Fried Chicken.
But
chickens will kill each other, so they love
beef
eating
that
each
are
other.
jacked with so many different ingredients, and then at the very end, it's radiated with radiation to kill everything. And there is no long-range studies on what the radiation will do to us. There's no long-range independent studies on what eating a steer eating a steer.
No, that because
will do to us.
There is some concern because that's where they believe this recurrent outbreak of mad cow disease has been coming from. Is from this feed. There's bacterium in brain, in the brain tissue of just about any animal that cannot be ingested, and you will. And I forget I should look it up. But has a very adverse effect, and generally, I mean, this was something they used to see years ago when monkey brains was all the thing back in the sub-Saharan continent of Africa. The British would go down there and they'd eat these little exotic, and they'd go nuts because there's these little parasites and crap in the brain. So, yeah, they've seen this with cows, and it's become more and more common because they've been doing this mix with the feed. So you've got to cull the entire herd because you don't know where it's coming from, who's got it, and it's a matter of numbers. Can we kill off this herd and still make bottom line with with a clean herd?
Well, they'd probably have to even go out of the country because that stuff's is so prevalent now for so many years. It's just like the GMO farmers and the crops. I mean,
but if you can cut corners for 4 or 5 years, then suddenly you get an outbreak of mad cow. So you got to cull that entire herd. How far ahead are you monetarily? You can take a hit.
Exactly. And here's the problem.
You won't be happy about it, but you have
to go out to other countries. Well, other countries that are producing beef are interested in making money. They're doing the same thing or worse than what we're doing here in this country.
Where do you think we buy a lot of our beef?
Well, other countries, but I meant there's got to be some third world or countries out there that have.
Look, there are ranchers out here that free range, treat the cattle the same way they did back basically in the 1800s.
Eating Monsanto grown,
but eating Monsanto grown food.
There you go. And
well, it depends. Some of them are grain fed. Some of them are just put out into the wild and allowed to eat the wild grass. When it comes to beef, you don't want to eat any beef that's been fed any type of grain.
Well, most of them, even though they do the range feeding, most of them have a support of grain. They support their feed with grain. They almost all do anymore.
Here's another interesting fact with beef.
Oh, yeah, here we are. This is what I was looking for. Before we go on, Kuru was once epidemic in tribal New Guinea, and that is essentially a human form of mad cow disease because they were eating brains of everything.
Which is what? It interferes with what?
It's called spongiform encephalitis.
Which interferes with
the brain.
Brain function.
Well, it's a brain function,
synapse
of course.
Firing. It's a funny thing about beef, and I think this is one of the reasons America is so huge.
Yeah, that's what I was trying to remember.
You take a steer and you geld it, so it won't be so hyper. You don't want a bull. You want tender meat, not tough. So you keep it so it doesn't run around too much. You don't want the muscles. But how do you grow the muscles and be tender? Also, who wants to feed a steer for 4 years when you can feed it feed it and maintain it for 4 years, when you can cut that in half. Actually cut it down to maybe 18 months from, birth until eating. Well, how do you do that?
Japan raises
You
their
jack them with steroids. I mean, you jack 'em with steroids and other, I guess the same thing bodybuilders would take, supplements, so that they will grow faster. And since they're not moving, a lot of times they're shoulder to shoulder all day. They're walking in literal poop that's about a foot to a foot and a half deep. And that's their life, folks. And then they get hosed off, hosed off.
I was
And
driving through Southern California on I-5.
Mm-hmm.
It was August. It was about 112 degrees outside.
Stink.
And we drove by this huge cattle farm.
You could smell it
Oh, it was
miles
it was
away.
horrible.
You could smell it.
I've
2
never
or 3
smelled
miles
anything
away.
like that in my life.
and that's not so bad compared to the ones in Canada.
That was pretty bad.
They condense it probably to a third of what you're seeing there, probably even a quarter.
There wasn't a green blade of vegetation.
No, because
in
they
that
run too
entire
many
thing.
run too many animals, and at that
Well, I mean,
point,
there was animals were packed. It was like a mud.
right? And so, they're not eating grass, folks.
Nope.
No.
They're eating pellets.
A lot of them are.
yeah,
A
holy
lot of them are
mackerel.
fed the pellets.
Yeah,
That was something else.
how do you take a steer and naturally in 4 years it's ready to put down and you eat it? Well, it costs a lot of money and there's time. So let's get it down to 18 months to 2 years.
The turnover just multiplies your money. Because
yeah,
the turnover
yeah.
is so much quicker.
So the beef you're eating at the store, you go get a nice big steak, you get hamburger. Where do you think McDonald's gets their meat? I'd like to ask them, where do you get your meat exactly?
You can go up to little kiosks and say, "Where do you get your meat?"
Exactly.
And they'll give you a canned answer.
They will? Okay. Well, anyway, but the point is, you know how much meat America eats?
From the meat store.
Oh, we're talking millions of tons, okay? Where does it come from? You have to produce the animals at a quicker rate and get them onto the shelves at a quicker rate. So what are you eating?
Well, there's the
It
old
tastes
saying,
good.
you like sausage, but you don't want to see how it's made.
Right.
So there
you
you go.
don't have any clue what's inside of it. All you know is it tastes good and you're hungry. And boy, that's a great steak. But what's in the steak? You're jacked with steroids. People, look at some of these people. There's some huge people in this area. There's some huge people in today's modern world. And, they go 300, 325, 350, 400 pounds. But 250 is a lightweight nowadays. There's some big people, and they're not really that fat. There's some big people that, I just grow that way. How do you grow that way? Because they're jacked on steroids, and they don't even know they're jacked on steroids.
Okay, so
Mark, I'd like to jump in real quick. You're asking how much meat does America eat?
Yeah, I'd like to know.
According to the Wall Street Journal, as of 2010,
That's a long time ago.
now it's what I just quickly pulled up on the net. The average American consumer eats 145 pounds of beef a year.
145 pounds. That's a lot of meat.
that's a lot. I don't think I eat that much. And it's the average, but I mean, we just.
Oh, sorry. I apologize to our listeners. That meat also includes pork and poultry.
I personally probably eat more chicken than anything else.
But I know people that eat that a month. Seriously, I do.
I know the chicken's infected as well.
They are suggesting red meat is somewhere around 90 to 100 pounds at that time.
Well, I'm just speaking personally.
Well,
sorry.
For myself, I buy the groceries in our family, and I cook. I go and I look at the labels. How do I even know? I read a label and it says my chicken breasts. These were not grown with hormones
Or steroids.
Or steroids. How do you know that?
But they're eating all the crap that's in the genetically
Exactly.
modified.
They are still
grain.
grown because it's being fed to them.
Well, and the other thing is about, like, somebody brought up to me one time that originally chickens ate bugs and worms.
Exactly.
Yeah,
And now they're being fed
Chickens
something.
are carnivores.
Special grain.
Right. So
They only eat grain when they absolutely have to.
That's not true. I watched Cinderella the other day, and she just takes out her apron and throws the grain.
anyway,
You can talk with the way they used to farm, and the way that even if you go and do some research on organic home farming, They will tell you to get several chickens and build a box and put those chickens in the box and put it on your yard wherever your garden is going to be, and every couple days move that box, and the chickens will aerate the soil.
Yeah, because that's why they scratch the ground. They're looking
kill
for
the
grubs
bugs
and everything else.
And then you just keep moving them, and that is where you get rid of the bugs out of your soil so your plants can grow. They'll crap on the ground and fertilize the soil, and they'll work it back in, and you just keep moving them. Chickens have a very good purpose when we use them correctly.
Yeah, it's very interesting, though. I mean, even as old as I am, I grew up, and all I ever saw with chickens we fed them grain, and that's not what their natural.
Well, it's cost effective to do that.
Yeah,
exactly. It's cheap.
Well, a friend of mine when we were growing up, they had chickens, a lot of chickens. No pen, they just wandered, and they had a couple of horses. So very rarely did they feed the chickens. The chickens just kind of scrounged.
Right.
In Hawaii,
they did fine.
That's what they
were always
do. Yeah, because they're going to eat bugs. They're going to find the bugs.
One of the things I've been researching is in Hawaii, homeowners that have any type of yard tend to have chickens because
and they're all over Mexico.
They are.
I can't believe they're all feeding those chickens.
Yeah, they're just an effective way of controlling insects.
They're effective for a lot of reasons too.
So it only makes sense
good
if you
guard dog.
Yeah,
yeah.
They make noise.
If you live in a place that has a whole bunch of bugs that might be hurtful, like Hawaii has,
or the South,
you let these chickens loose and they eat them up.
But just like the beef, you're trying to produce as many chickens as possible for as cheaply as possible, but make them as heavy as possible to get as much money out of each chicken as possible.
Right.
So it's all an economic system and situation. It's all about economy. So how many chickens can you produce in 1 month?
This is okay. Hence, this is the thing. There's this movement, the small family farms. This stuff is growing. There's magazines.
Mm-hmm.
This stuff is growing out there. In America, a lot of families are going back to the small family farms so that they can, allow their chickens to eat properly. They can raise their beef, on grass-fed, what they were naturally.
It just takes a lot of work.
It is a lot. It is a lot of work,
and most people don't have the time.
Well, because you're right. Because the society, what we do now is you work 8, 10, 12 hours a day, 5, 6 days a week. How are you going to get out there and do the little farm?
Anyway, what I was saying is that we have a real problem that is nothing but a financial windfall, because if you're dealing with chemicals that will affect the nervous system of bugs, for instance, and birds,
and humans.
Okay, then you have a problem with a high rise of brain dysfunction with humans, so that you have an increase in medications by the pharmaceutical companies that are prescribing drugs at a rate never before heard of in our world. So you've got this problem on both ends trying to be solved by chemicals. And the jury's out on GMOs. It's not in by any means. It needs some serious independent study from very determined and very honest people that have no chance of being bribed off.
Okay, that's not going to happen.
No, wait,
well, you need
not,
that.
It's not going to happen.
I want to come to defense, in a sense, to some of the scientists here. We talk about people being bought off, and I won't defend a single politician. I don't care what side of the aisle they're on. I don't care what flag they wave. I'm not going to defend a politician for what they do. But many scientists are caught between a rock and a hard spot. For example, you work at Polytech as a scientist. Well, scientists make money. The way they get their salary paid is to do experiments for companies
and publish,
and then publish those findings.
No, I understand all that, and of
Right.
course the
But
other
here's
side of
the
the
science-
coin is
here's
that
the science of this problem. If I do a study for Monsanto and I come up with negative data, and I return that negative data, I publish that negative data, I let it out there, guess what Monsanto is not going to be asking me to do again?
Not going to use you anymore.
well, yes,
And guess
no,
who
I
else
mean,
won't use you?
R&D
Anybody else that's associated with it.
R&D is it necessarily is aware that there is an experimentation phase, and that there is going to be failures. Not everything's 100% right off the bat, but that's part of R&D, and you give so many years in order to formulate this, that, or the other thing, depending upon what your goal is. And they understand it. The science and the chemists understand that. That's part of the whole
Right, it's
process.
goal-oriented.
Yes. Now, what they will not abide is that once they've got something out on the market, if there is testing that's done, that when this is proved to be something profitable, you come in and say, no, it's not. It's causing havoc. It's causing this. It's causing that. And we're taking it off the market. No, they're going to dig their heels in. Celebrex was primarily used for arthritis because it is an anti-inflammatory. And it led to eventually a lot of people were winding up with stroke and heart attack and everything else as a result of one of the side effects. And you may have saw those ads on TV that one of the side effects was, of course, death. Which is a pretty harsh side effect. I've got a little bit of bursitis in my elbow, and I'm going to take some Celebrex, but I could die as a result of that. And they took a look at similar anti-inflammatories that use the same essential chemical compound. And it was a big problem. There was a lot of lawsuits and this and that and the other thing. Well, Agent Orange came under the same level of scrutiny when, after the Vietnam War, all these babies were being born with deformities and people were having problems, and it just wreaked havoc. The key component in Agent Orange is dioxin. Talk to anybody today about dioxin. It's a deadly chemical, and they don't care for it. But we're going to have to not care about it some other day, because sadly we are out of time for this week's program. We will resume with part 2 of this fascinating topic, GMOs, next week. So, for
Lou Rogers,
Mark Wilson.
David Cameron.
I am Chase Rockwell, saying so long until the next time you find yourself across the cosmos.
Send any questions or comments to us via email at info@acrossthecosmos.com. Also, visit us on the web at www.acrossthecosmos.com for show updates, news, and other important information. No part of this podcast may be used without the express written permission from the staff of Across the Cosmos. Across the Cosmos is a production of Omite Corporation. Copyright 2015.